Hey folks, welcome to Narratives. Narratives is a podcast exploring the ways in which the world is better than in the past, the ways it is worse, and the paths towards a better, more definite vision of the future. I'm your host, Will Jarvis, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. You can find show notes, transcripts, and videos at narrativespodcast.com. Well, Kai, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing really good. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thanks so much for taking the time to hop on. I really appreciate it. Do you mind giving us a brief bio and some of the big ideas you're interested in?
Yeah. Let me. This entire thing really started back in 2011. I was, I guess, like 12 at the time, and I grew up very religious, very religious. My family is LDS; they're Mormons.
Nice.
And like with most religions, you kind of grow up with this idea that one day you're going to have this afterlife and everything's going to be okay, and it's actually a very comforting feeling, right? So I grew up with that, and as I got older, I kind of disconnected from it a little more around that time. And what sucks is you kind of lose that comforting feeling. Like all that stuff is still it would be very great to have, right?
Yes.
Especially living forever. It's a fantastic concept, right? And losing that was difficult, right? Like losing that kind of comfort. And so I remember at the time I was just browsing the internet, and I came across what was called the 2045 initiative. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It was a project by this Russian billionaire named Dmitry Itskov. And he wanted to make humans immortal by 2045.
Nice.
And I thought that was just like the coolest concept ever at the time. It was like mind blowing to me. And so I was looking into it, and I started to learn about all these technologies, one of those being cryonics, of course, but also, aging drugs and reversing and curing aging and all these longevity interventions that people were working on. And I think he ended up not pursuing that anymore. I think he wanted to have brain transplants by 2020, and I think the timeline started getting a little difficult.
Got a little bit difficult.
Yeah. 2045 is it starts coming up quickly, right?
Yeah.
And but it kind of unlocked that in me. It was like, okay, I still love this idea of living forever. Obviously, this is a fantastic concept, and if we can accomplish this through science, I mean, wow! Like I can't think of anything more impactful to work on for the human race, right?
Absolutely.
And that unlocking that kind of ruins you a little bit, because I remember being in ninth grade. I was in freshman year of high school, and I would go in and I'd get my English homework, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, we're gonna fucking die. Like, what am I doing sitting here working on this? Right?
It seems like a waste, right?
Yeah, it seems like a waste of time. And it was really messing with me. So much so that I ended up actually dropping out freshman year, dropping out of high school.
Nice.
And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work on something in life extension eventually and help move that forward, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do that there in school. So I ended up leaving. And working on anything in this field is difficult, of course, because the barriers to entry are so high, right? I mean, you go to something like, an industry like tech. I mean, if you're a 12-year-old with a laptop, you can compete at a very high level. Like, you can just get involved, and for nearly no upfront investment. And I'm like 12 or 13 years old at the time. I grew up in a townhouse outside of Baltimore. I have no connections to anyone in biotech or deep tech or anyone working on any of these things. So didn't really know how to get started. So I dove into what I was good at, which was tech, which was computers. I always played games. I taught myself to code at a young age, making Minecraft plugins, right? And so it was a good way to kind of just start building things and getting experience and starting to get involved in just the world of entrepreneurship. And so I started with Minecraft servers way back in the day. So this was still around when I was ninth grade, but it was after I dropped out. And I started building Minecraft servers, and Minecraft servers back in the day were kind of a gold mine. They were, you could really get a little business going on Minecraft servers.
Awesome.
And to this day, people still do have fantastic businesses in Minecraft. I mean, that make millions. It's incredible. Same thing happens in Roblox and now the Web3 industry is just kind of realizing how much money there really is in gaming and starting to go towards that more. But so yeah, I started my first little business, which was Minecraft servers, and over time just kind of worked my way up. I went from making Minecraft servers to hosting them. I started a company called MyMC Servers when I was, I think, 15. And we became one of the larger providers in the entire world for Minecraft servers pretty quickly. And that was actually the first company that I sold back in those days. So that was kind of my first big win. It wasn't some massive sale or anything, but as a teenager, it kind of really...
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal for me. And so I kept trying to move up. I got into hosting all kinds of game servers for all kinds of different games at the next company, ended up selling that one. I got into even further down the hosting line. I got into dedicated servers, web hosting, VPSs. This was, of course, before everyone would go to AWS for a website or throw their site on Vercel. I mean, this was when you'd go to HostGator and throw your website up, right? So this is just a different time. Yeah, this is a much different time. And but it was fun. I loved that industry. And after that, I got involved in making I made a Web3 company back in 2017. This was before everyone called it Web3. This was, most people actually called it the decentralized web, was kind of one of the names for it. No one really knew what to call it at the time. And what I ended up building was a website builder that deployed websites onto IPFS or the decentralized web, right? And it was difficult even at that time to find product market fit. Right. I mean, this is like really early in crypto and everything.
Yeah, it's hard now.
It's still hard now. So it was even back in those days, it was difficult. And so I just, I had a ton of different projects that I worked on. Some did well, some, flopped over many years. I spent about 10 years in tech altogether. And my most recent tech company was one that I made with my buddy Dayton Mills. We have the same last name, but we're not brothers, just friends. Yeah. And we made Branch, and Branch was kind of, it was it's almost like a love letter to the last 10 years of working on all these projects. We both were working in Minecraft and Web3 and all these things over so many years. We knew about each other, but never really worked on anything. And so we kind of came together, and the CTO at Branch now is actually the guy that I made my first Minecraft server with. So we all kind of stuck together over the years, and then the baby of all of that was Branch. And Branch has some very cool unannounced things that I can't talk about, but it's going well. It's going well. And it kind of put me in a position where finally, after all these years, I had the opportunity to dive into the life extension space now with resources and experience, and not just being some kid who's excited about it, right? And now those barriers to entry seem a lot lower than they did when I was 12, right? So the timing really kind of lined up, and then I guess that brings us to CryoPets, brings us to now. So that's a quick rundown.
Absolutely.
The last decade. Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that. And why, a lot of people are working on longevity now. There's a lot of money going in the space. And I've been interested in cryonics for probably about 10 years. I saw you on Twitter. I think that's probably how I found you. Somebody had retweeted one of your tweets. I'm like, wow, I really like cryonics. And I think it's a good idea. Hedging your bets maybe a little bit. I actually believe in an afterlife, but I like to hedge my bets, I guess. I'm less epistemically confident than I would like to proclaim. But why focus on cryonics, right? Because there's a bunch of different approaches to longevity. There's ideas about working on senescence. There's all kinds of different approaches. Why do you think cryonics is the right approach for us to take at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually considering. So about this time last year was when I left my previous company and started focusing on all this stuff, and I was trying to figure out exactly where I'd be the most useful in the space. So I was looking all over life extension. I mean, everything from
Gotcha.
cryonics to aging to mind uploading. Like, what's everyone working on?
Yeah.
What does the industry look like? And I actually saw this tweet from Balaji, who was talking about sort of tech trees and mapping out different
Nice.
industries. And I really love the idea of that. I actually made my own tech tree just for life extension.
Awesome.
Pretty high level, just the very high level things that people are working
Right.
on, where the funding is going and what's not getting
Yeah.
attention, what needs help. And I sort of turned it into 3 different columns. One was more the chronic stuff. One was the life extension, longevity, interventions, aging,
Yeah.
that sort of area. And then one was kind of the more crazy stuff like digital consciousness and that whole area. And I found that cryonics was so like there was no focus on it, which was mind blowing to me because I mean I visited Alcor back in 2016. I got to walk around, before that was aware of cryonics and who was working on it. I didn't realize it was such a small industry. I didn't realize that there was pretty much no money going into this industry, which blew my mind because when I developed this tree, it was an entire column. Like this seemed like a very important piece of this, right?
Right.
So it became pretty obvious like where I was needed the most.
Yeah.
And as I got to talk with all the experts in the field and figure out where everything is, and it became so apparent that cryonics is the single most important thing that we need to focus on. And there's a few reasons for this. I think the main core one is that it's the only thing that actually targets the death problem, right? And because the problem is there's so many different causes of death. There's so many, I mean, if we're talking about radical life extension, what we're really playing is a nonstop game of whack-a-mole, right?
Right.
Every time something else comes up, we got to get it in time.
Yeah.
And, as time goes on, I mean, let's say even best case scenario, we cure aging in our lifetimes, reverse it completely.
Yeah.
Right. And, I mean, you better not, I mean, let's say you're living 200 to 300 years, you better not be spending any of that time in a car, right?
Right. Exactly.
Because as that time goes on, I mean, the probability of you dying in a car crash almost becomes 100%, right? Yep. And that's just one example. Definitely. I mean, senescence, even though solving it would be a massive breakthrough, there's so much more, right? There's so many more things that can kill us. So those probabilities start to look a little scary over when you look at it over a radical time period.
Definitely.
And and that's best case scenario if we can actually solve the senescence problem. Right. The problem is we haven't made really any real progress. That's the problem. And that's
on aging.
On aging. Yeah. We haven't been able to extend the human lifespan by 1 day to this day, aside from exercise and diet, right? I mean, nothing has even come close. And I think there's a little too much optimism when it comes to just how far we're going to be able to extend our lifespan by drugging ourselves. I mean, just how much further that can get us has been a little too optimistic. And I know there's some, communicators in the space who, bring a lot of people in and get people excited about it, which is really good, but maybe are a little dishonest when it comes to just how far we're actually getting and how much further we have to go. So it kind of makes people feel like, oh, this might be possible. And that's how I felt back 10 years ago, right? I was like, wow, I can't wait to see the progress of this over time. And 10 years later, here I am, and there hasn't really been much progress, right? And I know people, chronicists as well. I know Max Moore talks about this, where, I mean, he's been looking at this space for much longer than I have. Like 40 or 50 years, he's been looking at this space. Yeah. And there really hasn't been a lot of progress. So
gotcha.
It's a dangerous bet if you're someone who's really focused on radical life extension. Like if you're someone who just wants to make people live, slightly longer, healthier lives, and that's fantastic, right? That's good work. But you're in the healthcare industry, right? You're not someone who's working on radical life extension. If we're really talking about radical life extension, we need to get serious about what's probable in our lifetimes and double down on it.
Absolutely.
And when you look at something like, really anything in biotech, there's so much red tape. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how many billions you throw at it, you still have to get through those clinical trials,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And when you look at something like cryonics, this is an engineering problem. There is no red
Yes.
tape. There is no clinical trials.
Right.
The more money we throw at it, the faster it gets solved, period. Right.
Right.
And so, yeah, it at least for me, it seems very obvious to focus on cryonics. And I hope that becomes more of a focus as time goes on.
Definitely. Well, you make a lot of really good points, Kai, in that I don't know if you've ever seen this lecture. I do CrossFit. The founder of CrossFit, who's now no longer affiliated for a number of reasons, has a lecture he gives where he's explaining the philosophy, and he like paints these like three buckets of death. You've got like kinetic problems, you get hit by a car. You can have like toxins, and then the pathogens, and then there's like chronic conditions which we can kind of control through diet and exercise, and then aging, which we can't really do anything about.
Right.
It's so fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Like cryonics solves a lot of these problems in a way that other approaches do not. And aging is it's a field that Laura Deming talks about this. She says, aging is like kind of a toxic field. There's a lot of grifters. There's a lot of like misinformation. And so perhaps like one of your claims is that it's kind of overstated that they've overstated. Well, there's been some overstating of the amount of progress that has gone on in the field of aging so far.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Laura, because she's actually a fantastic example of people who are extremely smart, who have started in the longevity field and spent a lot of time in there and are now moving to cryonics. I won't go too much into what Laura's working on because it's not announced, but there are a lot of really intelligent people who are now moving their focus over to cryonics. And I think we're going to see a lot more over the next 10 years or so.
Very nice.
Yeah. So exciting stuff.
Well, and Kai, like I forgive me if I'm wrong, because I don't know much about this, but it does seem like there is a more of a biological precedent for cryonics. If I think of like, aren't there certain species of frogs that can survive very, very cold temperatures and then like kind of be revivified or something like that? Whereas like aging, we don't really see. I mean, there's some examples, right, but not very much in mammals.
Yeah, not a ton in mammals. I mean, we already live very long compared to other mammals that are close to us, right?
Right.
So we're already doing pretty well in that department. But what you're referring to is actually it's a species of tree frog up in it's found in Alaska. Is one of them. There's actually a few animals that do this, but that's one of the cooler ones. It actually in the winter it freezes up to 60% of its brain and its body, and its blood stops flowing and its heart stops beating. I mean, by all definitions, it's dead, right?
Right.
And in the spring, it thaws out and it comes back to life. Nice. And it's incredible because, like when you're, if you can base an intervention off of something that's already happening in nature with a different organism, I mean, that's fantastic, right? Like that's a really good signal that this is something that is possible. And what's incredible about them is they have built-in cryoprotectants.
Wow.
These frogs have evolved with these cryoprotectants that helps them not take damage when they freeze. And so for humans and animals, when we cryopreserve them, we have to add those cryoprotectants, of course, the ones that we make. But it's generally the same thing. So I mean, it's really incredible to see that in nature. That's a really amazing signal.
Absolutely. Sure. And are most of those cryoprotectants around preventing ice crystals? Is that the big technical challenge, or what is the big technical challenge with cryonics right now?
That is, one of the core challenges. I mean, it especially was one of the core challenges back before vitrification was really introduced. I mean, I think vitrification was introduced in the 80s, and I think Alcor started applying it, I believe, around the year 2000. And I mean, before this, it was obviously very difficult because what happened is you have the crystallization that happens, the ice formation. Ice also expands. I believe it's 9% larger volume as opposed. So
Kind of a problem.
pretty much,
Brain.
pretty much
Yeah.
every cell is getting pretty messed up.
Yeah.
And so that that was one of the biggest problems. And of course, Greg Fay is the one that really introduced vitrification into cryobiology back in the 80s, and he he's still to this day makes the leading cryoprotectants that the whole industry uses, right? And so that is one of the core problems is perfecting that process. We've come a long way. It's definitely a lot better than straight freezing, which it was originally, right? But it introduces a few more problems because these cryoprotectants are toxic. There's a level of toxicity that they have. So there is damage that they're still doing on the way in that we need to be able to solve eventually.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, that's one of the big ones. There are others. I mean, one of the cool things about the cryonics industry is a lot of the work translates really well from model organisms to humans.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you're testing an aging intervention on a mouse, which has nearly no genetic diversity, right? It's very rare that's going to translate well to humans, and that's why it takes so long. And just as a side note, I mean, this is why Celine over at Loyal, where she's working on with the dog aging drugs, is brilliant. What's amazing about that is that the interventions that we actually test on dogs, if they end up working, there's a much higher chance that that's going to translate over to humans.
Gotcha. Very nice.
But yeah, a lot of longevity science is still done on the mice. So I'm not sure how bullish I am on that. But
it's questionable.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess the real difference when it comes to animals and humans is scale. It's the being able to preserve large organs and large tissues. And because obviously at a smaller scale, that's much easier.
Yeah.
So those are really the main problems that we're faced with.
Gotcha.
But like I said, they're engineering problems. We
right.
throw money at this, we're going to solve it. So
yeah, no, I love that, and it does seem like also like versus the age. So aging seems to be very different in different types of animals, but it does make sense to me that perhaps freezing a mammal is like kind of freezing a mammal. Like there's maybe like smaller. I feel like differences. They seem to be much smaller for a reason I can't quite articulate.
Exactly.
Very cool. I'm curious. I was reading a couple years ago. There's a lot of hype about plastination. What do you think about plastination? Is that a good approach, or is freezing just much better for some reason?
Yeah, there's a few approaches. Specifically, these approaches are usually targeted towards brain preservation. That's where a lot of the research has gone. Plastination is one of them. There's definitely a few problems with plastination. Obviously, I mean, there hasn't been a ton of research into it, which is one of the biggest problems. I mean, we've been working on cryopreservation for 50 plus years now, right?
Yeah.
Even longer. So, not to mention the fact that we've already, Greg Fay took a completely cryopreserved rabbit kidney, I believe, and then put it back in the rabbit and had it work completely fine. I mean,
wow.
We're right on the edge of having organ cryopreservation and even the revival of small mammals like hamsters. That's not far off. So
wow.
It would seem a little silly to kind of switch focus now to a different preservation technique, but that's not even the biggest problem. The main problem is that plastination, like a lot of these other preservation techniques, are irreversible.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. A lot different from thawing out versus like deplastinating something. Yes.
Right. And a lot of people are okay with this. I don't want to say a lot. There's not a lot of people focusing on it in the first place, but some people are okay with this because they believe
you're kind of kicking the can down the road. It's like, well, we're figuring that problem out later. Is that the sense?
Well, it's practically irreversible. I mean, I guess you could say eventually everything would be possible, but it's not something that I would.
Pretty far down
you might as well be pouring some cement in there, right? But they believe that one day we'll be able to scan and upload our consciousness, our what makes us, our personality, our memories. I'm not big on the uploading route. I know Robert McIntyre is kind of in a similar field where he's working with, aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation, which is sort of another example of that, where the end goal is uploading. Because they do offer, good preservation, right?
Gotcha.
So as long as we can preserve it, then, as long as we can scan it and upload it to a digital consciousness that we have in the future, that's fantastic. But then it comes into the debate of what makes you and what's a clone and how do you stay yourself if you transfer that or that. And that's, that's a can of worms, that's an interesting one to go down. So I think cryonics still makes the most sense because of the opportunity of reversing it. That's the key, and that's the only path we have to that right now. So
right. In reversal, it really matters. Why focus on pets? Is it just a bigger population you can get started on? Just what's the impetus for pets in first?
Yeah, so when I was trying to figure out, I knew I wanted to build a company in the cryonic space. I knew I wanted it to be a for-profit. I don't think the nonprofit route is smart. And I believe it's why Cryonics is, Alcor hit their 50-year anniversary, and Cryonics is still like a weird fringe topic. Obviously there's a lot being done wrong there. I think a nonprofit approach is one of those problems. I knew I wanted to build something in the space. I didn't really know exactly where to start, but I tried to look at where I wanted Cryonics to be. And for me, I would love it if Cryonics is more of a go-to option than just burning bodies or burying people in the ground, right? It seems very barbaric.
Yeah.
And I'd love to make cryonics one of those standard options, at least, so people can have the opportunity to choose. And I think the way you do that, and also the way that you legitimize cryonics in the first place, is getting it into hospitals, getting it into real medicine, not having it be some weird building out in the middle of the desert that people aren't taking seriously.
Arizona, right? We don't know what's going out there.
Right.
Weird, Yes.
And having real doctors perform these procedures, right? I think that's extremely important. I don't think these two industries should be enemies eventually. Like, we need to bring these together. And obviously it's very difficult to show up to a hospital and say, hey, you guys should start doing cryonics, right? Like that's not a likely outcome. But if we can start with pets and we can introduce the idea of cryonics in veterinary hospitals, then eventually we can get there. And it's actually one of the things that we're doing with CryoPets is we're actually a hybrid facility. So we are an animal hospital mixed with a cryonics facility.
Nice.
So we do both. So I was trying to think like, okay, what's the best route to getting the first, let's just focus on getting the first veterinary hospital on board. And I was like, well, the easiest way to do that is if I am the veterinary hospital, right? Like, and then it's a pretty easy sell, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think, even when it comes to people being interested in cryonics, I think if it's a veterinarian who is telling you about the real science behind this, and although it's experimental, just coming from a more legitimate place, I think it can really change the amount of people who are interested in this.
Yes, absolutely.
And what that also enables us to do is scale across the country. An ideal future is that anyone can go to their, a veterinary hospital, an animal hospital in their area, in their state, and have them be able to perform this procedure, the initial steps of the cryopreservation on their pet if they need to have that put down. And then they would transfer the pet to our facility for the long term, right?
Very nice.
So all these things kind of, prove that cryonics can be something that can scale, something that can be venture backable, and we can bring a lot of money in the space to hopefully speed up the progress of this, which is my main goal, of course. So, I think pets they work as a fantastic gateway, and we're seeing this in the longevity space as well, with dog aging drugs mostly. I wish they would have a little focus on cats as well. I've been asking around. I have a cat here actually with me. She's 10 now, so she's actually one of the inspirations to moving quickly on this, right? Because the clock is ticking there, right? But I think pets are the way to getting cryonics mainstream. So.
Absolutely. And is the regulatory barrier smaller dealing with animals than humans? I'm assuming it would be, right?
Vastly smaller. I
Gotcha.
mean, it's a lot easier. There's all kinds of problems with humans. I mean, sometimes there's autopsy requirements they have to get around. I mean, the
Gotcha.
hospital, they're like, no, actually, we have to cut this person open. You're like, well, they
God.
signed up for cryonics. We need to
Like, yeah, maybe not
act
great.
fast
Yeah,
here. Right?
it's time.
I mean, really, like, you don't want more than, I mean, ideally, you want to
Minutes,
perform
kind of, I'm assuming.
cryopreservation directly
Like
after
as soon as you
legal
can. Yeah.
death, right? And that's why pets are great, even just for efficacy of at first, because euthanasia gives us the opportunity to start that
Right.
procedure directly after they're dead. So yeah, it's difficult with humans. There's a lot of unsolved problems there. The sudden death problem is one of the main ones, which is
Yeah.
going to be difficult to fix. I mean, a lot of the times people we don't go in to get euthanized, right? We
We ride that
have a
baby
heart
out as long
attack
as
or
we
a
can. Yeah,
stroke, or
exactly right.
we go in the middle of the night, right? And it
Right,
makes
right.
it
Yeah.
very difficult to. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of the case studies with people who are cryopreserved today, I mean, sometimes they go 18, 24, 32 hours before they're at the facility. And I mean, there's just not a lot left to preserve there, right?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
preserving soup. And so
Yeah.
it's tough, it's tough. But pets gives us the opportunity to you know prove that cryonics can be a profitable business and solve a lot of these problems, and then eventually move to humans once we're more confident. So
Right. That makes sense. No, it makes a ton of sense, and you're right. It does need to be in every hospital for this to really work, right? Because it just takes too long. If you got to fly to Scottsdale or whatever, it's not going to work. I'm I'm curious, Kai. How much of the lack of uptake of cryonics is do you think like it's just something where people find it weird and it's a norm we can change, or is it just something inbuilt? Involved in kind of like the less wrong community, and a lot of people they did this fun survey Yudkowsky did, and maybe it wasn't Yudkowsky, but someone did a survey and they asked everyone whether they signed up for cryonics, and it was like many multiples more than the people that were actually signed up at Alcor, right? So like people will say like they're going to do it, or they never really get around to it, and even beyond that, like a lot of people just find it like really weird or something like that.
right, yeah, I was actually talking to Christine Peterson the other day, who was the co-founder of the Foresight Institute.
Oh, nice.
She's awesome. She's the one that coined the term open source, and I mean,
Very cool.
she's done so much. But she was telling me that a lot of the work that she's done is just going to people in the industry, people who are part of Foresight and just in that community, and helping them get signed up, like just walking them through it, being there
Gotcha.
with them, because it is a complicated process. I mean, I think for Alcor, it even takes up to a month to really get everything in order, and you got to sign over your life insurance in most
Right.
cases, and it's kind of a daunting process.
Yeah.
And I know Tomorrow Biostasis is working on making that a little easier. They're doing good work there. Yeah, I think so. I think when it comes to people who are interested and not signed up, I think that's kind of one of the bigger barriers.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of work, or they're kind of younger at the time. They don't feel like they need to sign up tomorrow, right?
Right.
But really, it's better to be safe than sorry, I suppose. So, and I think when it comes to people being just weirded out by it, I've noticed that most people that I talk to about this, have no idea about the science. I mean, there's just been no
Gotcha.
communication on the science of where we're actually at with this, how close we are to organ cryopreservation that's completely reversible, how close we are to even reviving small mammals from cryopreservation. I mean, people just really don't know. So I know there's definitely like a barrier of knowledge there that we need to do better at just providing that information. Like, hey, we're not just throwing people in an ice chest. I mean, there's
Right.
real science.
Exactly.
And I think another step, which obviously we're talking about, is getting it into hospitals. Because
Gotcha.
if it's your doctor or your veterinarian telling you about this, as opposed to just some random company that's trying to get money from you, it's just it's a totally different ballpark. So
Absolutely. No, that makes a ton of sense. Well, how has the experience been so far? I mean, when did you get started with the project? When was it initially like, okay, like it's actually time to like commit and make this thing a reality? Like, how has it been?
yeah, I think I came up with the idea for it initially in July last year. So I've really been working on it since then. And Cryonics is a funny business because you can, I mean, if you set up all the meetings, I mean, you could meet everyone in Cryonics in a week.
Right.
It's a
That's the
pretty
whole
small
field.
space.
Yeah.
And luckily everyone is awesome. It's been
That's
like
cool.
everyone has been extremely welcoming of, the ideas that I'm presenting and my background coming from, tech, which is like a totally different space. Learnings that I have from all those years and bringing them in here. Everyone's been really awesome and helpful. And it's kind of a space because at the end of the day, we just don't want to die and we want to help other people not die. Like
Pretty good
you don't
thing.
go into, you don't go into cryonics because you want to make a ton of money. Like
Right.
no one's here because they want to make a ton of money. If I want to make a ton of money, I would just found another tech startup,
Right.
right? So
Definitely.
you just kind of have a big group of people who are all doing this because they truly just believe in it and want it to work and want to help people. So it's a really cool community. So it's really, it was a lot of months of just, meeting everyone around the space, talking to people who don't necessarily know about it yet, but should be more involved.
Yeah.
And then of course, just getting up to speed myself on where all the research is and how I can utilize it and how I can help. Right.
Definitely.
So no, I mean, it's been fantastic. We actually just started raising at the beginning of this month, end of last month.
Nice.
Our seed round, which has been going extremely well. There's been a lot of interest and I think we can prove that Cryonics can work here as a real business. So no, it's been really good. And it's one of those things where, I love the time that I spent in tech and in gaming and all these fields of hosting, some of my best memories. But truly, when you work on something that is life and death, when you work in an industry where that's on the line, it's really an amazing feeling. I mean, it gives you a lot of, that feeling of purpose is you feel it a lot more. So,
Right.
no, it's been a really cool experience so far.
I love that. I'm curious. There's one other aspect to cryonics. People do not talk about enough, and it's actually the political. It seems like the political is actually really important for cryonics, and governance of organizations over the long term seems to be like a really difficult problem to solve. Have you thought about this at all? You've worked in Web3, so this is kind of like a related area, but have you thought about like how to solve some of the governance challenges about keeping an organization running, successfully over the long term? You've got to keep things cold, right? And like, this is a real challenge.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. I mean, and this is a huge problem. You see, even there's a cryonics facility in Russia called Cryorus, I believe. And right now they're having a very, it's almost like a fight for power over the facility right now between the owners. And it goes to show you like how careful you have to be with something like this, because if you're thinking about a company that has to ideally exist for hundreds of years, I mean, you have to be careful how you approach that. And I do come from a Web3 background, and I'm involved in DAOs, and there's a lot of, exciting ideas that are, forming as far as decentralized governance over companies, over organizations. Certainly none of them are proven enough by this point to really execute or count on for something like this. In the future, maybe there will be. It's definitely like an exciting area that I'm watching closely. I'm even involved in like something called the Dog Longevity DAO right now, where we're helping fund dog longevity research. And so there's a lot of exciting, hopefully breakthroughs that we have there where people can, start forming organizations and companies with those structures. But I think it's going to take some time. And I mean, there aren't a lot of companies that have lasted hundreds of years, right? I think one of the key components and what all the other cryonicists know, as well, is that we all have to be working together in order to survive that long. And Alcor is, props to them for lasting 50 years now, right? I mean, that's a big achievement. It shows that it can be done, right?
Yeah.
But I think it really comes down to everyone just collaborating and making sure that, we certainly don't want like a big PR disaster in cryonics right now. Right. There even were some back in, I can't remember the year. But cryonic facilities that started up and then failed, and then
Right.
had a lot of bad PR around them,
Yeah.
and where the space industry where we had large failures, and it kind of caused people kind of backed away from it for a while, right?
Yeah.
But of course, private companies came in and made a huge difference and got it going again, right? Which is kind of the dream for cryonics as well. So yeah, I think it's really going to come down to collaboration and just taking it one step at a time. Figuring out how we can survive for that long, because it's one of the most important aspects of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it definitely does seem like one thing that is on your side is if you can get a large enough mass of people who are signed up or enough pets signed up, you know what I mean? There's a certain amount of momentum to keep these things going. Like if there's norms around it, it's like normal, it's a normal thing. And there's processes, like it's much easier, right? I like to give the example of, there's still Stasi officers who get pensions, you know what I mean? So
right.
like these things get like generally like we're actually pretty good at like maintaining some things through, regime changes and all kinds of different ways.
Right.
If it's common enough knowledge and it's a normal enough thing.
100%. No, that's a great example.
Definitely. So
Yeah.
it is solvable in some sense.
Yeah.
I want to move a little bit and talk about your experience. So you dropped out of high school, and you mentioned like on your website that one of the things that it was really helpful about that was you were able to sleep. And it's actually one thing that empirically we see is that like it's actually really bad for kids not being able to get enough sleep. And like I remember like when I was in high school, we had to go in like 7 o'clock in the morning, and you're just like destroyed because you're meant to be sleeping in at this time. You're like trying to stay awake. How much, how important do you think that aspect is, and do we just overlook that because adults just need less sleep?
Man, I think that's probably one of our biggest failures in society, is like dragging kids out of bed on zero sleep, trying to shove a bunch of knowledge in their head that they don't retain at all.
Nope.
Right. Or if they do, it's for the short term, for the quiz, for the test, whatever. And then they lose it completely because they don't have the sleep that they need. I mean, it's absolutely mind blowing to me. Especially, we have the science, we know how much kids need to be sleeping.
Yep.
Right. It's a lot more than adults, and they don't get it. They don't get the sleep that they need for their development. No, it blows my mind. If I do have kids, they will be homeschooled and they will be sleeping in. I can tell you that. But it was absolutely, I believe, a game changer for me. Just the clarity I was able to have throughout those years. I think was, and man, the health benefits that it probably has that we don't even are still not studied enough. I think we're going to find out that was one of our biggest failures.
I think that was a big mistake.
Sort of set up, for education.
Definitely.
It blows my mind.
Do you think high school is just generally kind of overrated then?
It's kind of tough because you don't want to tell every kid to drop out of high school and then they don't find their footing, and
right, it doesn't
it just
work.
doesn't work out for them. I think there are certain people who, once they get to high school, they feel like, if they're already ready to kind of jump in and start, whether it's starting a company or just getting going on their own projects. And I think those people know who they are at the time.
Gotcha.
Right. And so I don't think those people are necessarily the ones who are looking around on podcasts or on videos to see if like, should I drop out? I think they're just already dropping out, right? Like they know Absolutely. They have the confidence in themselves that they need. So I think high school definitely has its merits. College, I think, is completely useless. That's a different topic entirely, at least in its current structure. It's laughable in my opinion. But I think high school is one of those times where if you feel like you're ready, then absolutely get out of there as fast as you possibly can.
Gotcha.
Because if I didn't have those years, I would probably not be working on what I am now until 4 years from now at least. Right. I'd be so far behind. And that time is extremely valuable, especially when you're at a state as a kid where your mind is still so malleable. right?
Right.
Like you can completely change who you are with enough
Yep.
work, right? At that age, especially. So it's a really valuable time. And I think most of it's wasted for most people, which is,
That makes
it
sense.
sucks. So yeah, I would recommend everyone who is intelligent and knows that they have what it takes to start their own business or figure things out on their own. Yeah, absolutely. High school is overrated.
Definitely.
For those people, 100%.
I love that. I love that. There's a great Scott Alexander post where he gives a graduation speech. And he talks about how they did these studies in the '60s. It was very unethical. They held some kids out of high school, and it turned out it was a pretty big cohort, and they were on average about a year behind. Like that was about what the effect size was. And that's on average, right? So there's some people who did fine, some people who didn't. Who did a little bit worse, but it's interesting. Like it's a pretty small effect size just holding for everything else.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, Kai, thank you so much for hopping on the show. I really appreciate it. Where should we send people? Where can people find CryoPets?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a ton up right now, but you can go to cryopets.com, hop in our Discord, feel free to chat in there about everything we're working on, or just hit me up on Twitter, at Kai Micah Mills. That's where I'm at most of the time. So, feel free to get in touch. And yeah, anyone who's interested in learning more, I'm always happy to talk about it. So
super. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kai. I appreciate
yeah,
it.
thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Narratives.